The morning of September 19th, 1944, a thin mist hung over the rolling farmlands outside Araort, France, softening the edges of the dense oak groves and the patchwork of fields beyond. In a small, hastily established forward command post, German tank crews of the Panzer Lehr Division leaned over maps and reports, their eyes tracing the American positions with an assumption born of routine confidence. They had faced countless Sherman tanks, M4A3s and Stuarts, and while they had learned caution after Normandy, nothing in their training had prepared them for what lay ahead. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Captain Otto Reinhardt, a veteran of Kursk and the Eastern Front, had been briefed on the latest intelligence from the front. Word had arrived 2 days prior. The Americans had deployed a new type of tank destroyer, the M18, Hellcat. Thin armour, a 66-inch turret traverse, and most remarkably a top speed reported at 55 miles per hour. Reinhardt laughed quietly at the report. 55 miles per hour? He muttered, fingers tapping a map. Our Panthers can barely reach 42 on a good road. This must be propaganda, the Allies exaggerating to frighten us. Yet there was unease in the barracks. Reconnaissance patrols had begun reporting small, agile American vehicles, striking and disappearing before German crews could properly target them. Lieutenant Klaus Meinhardt, a junior officer tasked with observation posts, had seen the aftermath firsthand. Destroyed Panther flanks, shells from nowhere, and crew reports describing tanks vanishing like ghosts. The stories seemed fantastical, but the physical evidence, tracks, burned-out hulls, displaced farm equipment, was real. The belief system instilled in the Wehrmacht over 5 years of relentless training was simple. Superior, armour, and firepower were decisive. The doctrine emphasized methodical advances, with frontal assaults conducted in echelon formation, supporting units maintaining cover fire, and tank commanders relying on calculated patience. Panthers and Tigers were not just weapons, they were symbols of German engineering supremacy, an assertion of tactical inevitability. Against them, even the most daring Allied units were expected to falter. Into this mindset arrived the M18 Hellcat. Designed by General Motors' Fisher Body Division at Willow Run, Michigan, the Hellcat was built with speed and surprise in mind, not armour. At just 18 tons, its 36mm hull armour could not withstand a Panther shell. Its 76mm M1 gun was potent but vulnerable, relying entirely on positioning and ambush tactics to neutralise heavier German tanks. The very notion of such a machine outmanoeuvring a Panther was alien to experienced Wehrmacht tankers. By late September, a captured M18 had arrived at Panzer Lehr Division headquarters, under careful guard. Reinhardt and his staff approached it with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. On first glance, it was a small, almost fragile vehicle, far from the monstrous weight and presence of the Tiger II. Its engine, a Continental R975 radial, purred quietly, hiding the lethal potential that Allied crews had exploited in France for months. The Germans began inspections systematically. Track tension, wheel alignment, turret rotation, everything was designed for efficiency and speed. Reinhardt's engineer, Hauptmann Friedrich Kappel, ran calculations while staring at the radial engine. "This is absurd," he muttered. "Even on flat terrain, the velocity reports cannot be real. 55 miles per hour, our Panthers strained to 42. The officers began cross-referencing intelligence reports, interrogating captured American crews, and reviewing after-action evidence. Every account confirmed the same astonishing detail. The Hellcat could accelerate rapidly, pivot, and disappear from the line of fire before a German gun could be brought to bear. Psychological training emphasized patience and fire discipline. Yet these American tank destroyers defied expectation, introducing an element the Wehrmacht had not accounted for: speed as a form of armor. Meanwhile, in the forward positions of eastern France, the consequences of misjudging the Hellcat were becoming painfully clear. German tankers, accustomed to calculated engagements with the heavier Shermans, found themselves outflanked and neutralized without warning. Even elite crews who had survived Kursk and the brutal encirclements on the Eastern Front began recording unnerving observations. The Hellcats struck only when conditions favored them and always vanished before the enemy could respond effectively. For Reinhardt and his colleagues, this was more than a technical curiosity. It was a cognitive dissonance. Their doctrine, their assumptions about the battlefield, and their confidence in German engineering supremacy were suddenly under threat not by a superior weapon, but by a fundamentally different approach to warfare. The Hellcat represented a philosophical challenge. Speed, mobility, and tactical flexibility could offset armor and firepower. As the morning sun burned through the mist, the German officers prepared for the formal demonstration. The captured M18 would be driven under observation, its capabilities measured against the metrics of German engineering. Reinhardt, careful to record every detail, watched as the vehicle rolled forward, the engine growling with a sound oddly reminiscent of an American racing plane rather than a tank. When the driver pushed the throttle fully, the Hellcat surged forward, reaching a speed that caused even seasoned panzer crews to blink in disbelief. It was in this moment that Reinhardt realized the depth of the challenge. The M18 was not invincible, but it was unpredictable. It operated under a different principle of warfare, one that the Wehrmacht had yet to fully integrate into its calculations. In capturing the Hellcat, the Germans had not simply obtained another weapon, they had obtained a lesson in the evolving psychology of armored combat, a tangible embodiment of how ingenuity and audacity could undermine years of doctrinal certainty. For the first time, German crews confronted a truth that would haunt them through the autumn campaigns. Their meticulous training and formidable equipment did not guarantee success. Victory depended not only on material superiority, but also on anticipating the enemy's willingness to exploit speed and surprise. The morning of September 20th, 1944, dawned over the makeshift Panzer Lehr testing grounds outside Bastogne, a rolling field that had been chosen for its combination of open spaces and irregular terrain. German officers had arranged a controlled demonstration of the captured M18 Hellcat, and for Captain Otto Reinhardt, the day was an opportunity to validate intelligence reports with hard evidence. The vehicle had been freshly serviced by a small detachment of American mechanics, who were interrogated under supervision to explain operational peculiarities. Hauptmann Friedrich Kappel crouched beside the radial engine, taking careful measurements. The Continental R975C1 radial, air-cooled and delivering 475 horsepower, seemed modest on paper, but its lightweight chassis transformed that power into startling velocity. Reinhardt's assistant, Lieutenant Erich Vogel, had prepared timing equipment to measure acceleration and braking. From 0 to 30 miles per hour in under 5 seconds, Vogel noted as the Hellcat surged forward along the dirt track. The vehicle's suspension, a vertical volute spring system, absorbed the uneven terrain with minimal loss of speed, allowing the tank to maintain stability while maneuvering at velocities unheard of in German doctrine. Observers in the Panzer Lehr Division could scarcely comprehend the implications. Panthers and Tigers, designed for frontal assaults with methodical planning, were formidable in combat but entirely dependent on predictable terrain and careful coordination. In contrast, the Hellcat's strength lay not in armor or direct firepower superiority, but in mobility as a force multiplier. The demonstration moved to a mock engagement scenario. Reinhardt had arranged for a stationary Panther turret as a target, hull partially obscured by a low earth berm. The M18 accelerated along a narrow path, pivoted sharply, and fired from a concealed firing position. The Panther's frontal armor was untouched, but the maneuver allowed the Hellcat to deliver a side shot with precise timing. Even at simulated ranges of 500 meters, the effect was unmistakable. Speed compensated for vulnerability. Reinhardt observed silently, noting the meticulous coordination of the vehicle's crew. Captain James Baker's principles, relayed through intelligence and American interrogations, were evident in every movement. Fire, then reposition before counterfire could be effective. For German tankers, this challenged the long-held belief that armor alone dictated survival in armored warfare. The technical specifications only heightened the astonishment. The M18 Hellcat's weight of 18 tons, compared to the Panther's 45, gave it more than double the acceleration per horsepower. Its turret traverse of 66 degrees per second allowed near-instantaneous target acquisition, far exceeding German expectations. Even the ammunition supply, 36 rounds of 76mm M1 shells, was calculated to maximize tactical engagement rather than sustained battle, reinforcing the doctrine of hit-and-run operations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. During the demonstration, Reinhardt and Kappel began taking notes on German combat manuals and comparing outcomes. Tactical tables that assumed Panthers would dominate engagements based on frontal armor now seemed incomplete. The M18's design had exploited a fundamental weakness in German tank doctrine: reliance on predictable engagements and heavy frontal armor. The Hellcat introduced a variable that German officers had been trained to ignore: the enemy's ability to strike unpredictably and withdraw before retaliation. The psychological impact was immediate. Experienced tankers, men who had survived Kursk, the Eastern Front encirclements, and Normandy, began to murmur among themselves. "We are trained to control the battlefield," one sergeant whispered. "Yet this is not a battlefield. It is a chase." Reinhardt noted these reactions in his report with a mixture of fascination and concern. The Hellcat did not merely fight, it altered the perception of risk. Reinhardt organized a series of timed maneuvers, simulating scenarios reported by American reconnaissance: ambush in wooded areas, sudden flanking attacks on Panther columns, and high-speed repositioning after firing. Each test reinforced the intelligence reports. The Hellcat could disappear from line of sight faster than any German tank could pivot or accelerate. Even the heavy Tiger II, weighing 70 tons, could not respond effectively. Interrogations of captured American crews provided additional context. Private Tommy Morrison, one of the youngest Hellcat loaders, had described in detail how the crew relied on terrain features, such as drainage ditches and scattered farm fences, to conceal their vehicle. Their doctrine emphasized avoidance of head-on confrontation, instead using the M18's speed to create psychological disorientation in the enemy. German officers, reading these reports, realized that the American approach was not a flaw of recklessness. It was a deliberate tactical philosophy built around mobility as defense. Reinhardt's technical officers attempted to reconcile these revelations with German engineering principles. Could a heavier armored vehicle achieve similar mobility? The calculations were discouraging. Engine power-to-weight ratios of Panthers and Tigers made high-speed flanking maneuvers impractical. Any attempt to match the Hellcat's mobility would compromise armor or firepower, forcing a trade-off that German designers had historically avoided. The turning point came when the captured M18 was allowed to maneuver under simulated fire from multiple positions. German gunners attempted to track the vehicle with emulated targeting protocols. The Hellcat repeatedly executed rapid shifts, side pivots, and short sprints along concealed paths. Each maneuver exposed the limits of German heavy tank design. Even when stationary firing positions were achieved, the window for effective response was measured in seconds. insufficient to neutralize the agile destroyer. By late afternoon, Reinhardt convened his final briefing. The officers, initially skeptical, now acknowledged the unavoidable conclusion. The M18 Hellcat redefined operational expectations in armored engagements. It was not invulnerable, but it forced a re-evaluation of tactical principles. Speed, maneuverability, and clever use of terrain could negate superior armor and firepower, challenging years of entrenched doctrine. Even minor details underscored this new reality. The Hellcat's lightweight chassis, its responsive Continental engine, and compact dimensions allowed navigation of terrain that would trap heavier German tanks. German crews who had studied the field reports from France realized that every destroyed Panther or immobilized Tiger in previous engagements was not merely due to tactical errors, it was the deliberate exploitation of mobility as a weapon. Reinhardt documented everything meticulously. His report, sent to Panzer Lehr Command, highlighted not just the specifications but the psychological dimension. German crews had to reconsider their reliance on armor supremacy and methodical doctrine. The Hellcat introduced a level of uncertainty previously unaccounted for a small, fragile vehicle capable of sowing chaos among veterans of the Eastern Front, simply by refusing to engage on predictable terms. The Wehrmacht faced a subtle, insidious realization. Victory was no longer guaranteed by sheer weight and firepower. The Americans had found a way to make vulnerability a tactical advantage, using speed and ingenuity to outmaneuver the heaviest of tanks. For Reinhardt and his peers, observing the M18 in motion was a moment of intellectual reckoning. They had always assumed that armored supremacy dictated outcomes, yet here was a machine that challenged the very foundation of their battlefield assumptions. By late September 1944, the controlled testing and observation of the M18 Hellcat had concluded, but its lessons lingered far beyond the Panzer Lehr grounds. Captain Otto Reinhardt compiled a report for the higher command detailing the vehicle's extraordinary mobility, agility, and unconventional tactical philosophy. The findings were clear. The Americans had engineered not merely a tank destroyer, but a weapon that manipulated perception, speed, and terrain to compensate for its vulnerability. Within the Wehrmacht, the reception was a mixture of incredulity and quiet apprehension. Senior officers, veterans of Kursk, the Ardennes, and the Eastern Front, had long relied on the supremacy of armor, disciplined formations, and methodical advances. The M18 Hellcat challenged this foundational assumption. Reinhardt's observations forced the uncomfortable recognition that enemy tactics could outpace brute force and meticulous planning. The implications for frontline operations were immediate, though subtle. German panzer commanders, previously confident in predictable engagements, now had to reconsider the psychology of the enemy. Reports from the Ardennes, the Lorraine, and the French countryside began to describe small, fast-moving vehicles that appeared, struck, and vanished before return fire could be coordinated. Units that had once relied solely on frontal firepower now faced the reality of high-speed, unpredictable threats. Reinhardt's notes emphasized the significance of terrain exploitation. The Hellcat could navigate drainage ditches, hedge-lined paths, and soft embankments, areas that immobilized heavier German tanks. Even when visibility allowed German crews to spot its location, the M18's acceleration and turret traverse often permitted a first shot before retaliation. The vehicle transformed environmental challenges into tactical advantages, redefining the battlefield in ways the Wehrmacht had not anticipated. From a logistical perspective, the Americans had also optimized production and deployment for maximum effect. The Hellcat's lightweight design reduced strain on engines and fuel requirements, allowing units to operate with minimal resupply compared to heavier vehicles like Panthers or Tigers. German engineers noted that the M18's high power-to-weight ratio of roughly 26 horsepower per ton combined with its air-cooled radial engine, allowed sustained high-speed maneuvers without overheating, a feature impossible to replicate in larger armored vehicles without sacrificing armor or firepower. The psychological consequences extended beyond technical calculations. Veteran tankers, who had endured endless armored duels across the Eastern Front, were forced to acknowledge a new type of warfare, one where speed, unpredictability, and tactical ingenuity outweighed brute force. Reinhardt observed murmurs of frustration and disbelief during the testing, an acknowledgement that doctrine alone could no longer guarantee battlefield dominance. The Americans, in designing the Hellcat, had leveraged psychological disruption as a force multiplier, making even well-trained crews hesitate in their engagements. These lessons were incorporated, cautiously, into Wehrmacht operational planning. Training manuals were amended to warn crews about the dangers of fast, lightly armored vehicles. Recommendations included increased reconnaissance, more dispersed formations, and vigilance against ambushes exploiting terrain. Yet, the reality of manpower shortages, supply constraints, and the escalating Allied advance limited the practical impact of these doctrinal adjustments. The M18 was one example of a tactical innovation that highlighted systemic weaknesses in German armored strategy, weaknesses that could not be remedied by training alone. Meanwhile, American crews continued to exploit the Hellcat's strengths. Accounts from Normandy, Lorraine, and the Ardennes consistently described the same operational pattern: small units striking from concealed positions, firing precisely, and disappearing before enemy countermeasures could be coordinated. The vehicle's successive ambushes against Panthers, Tigers, and even heavily fortified positions reinforced the psychological narrative first observed by Reinhardt and his team. Speed, rather than armor, had become the Hellcat's weapon of choice. Historically, the M18 Hellcat exemplified a larger theme in World War II, the interplay between technology, doctrine, and psychology. While much of the war emphasized industrial output, heavy armor, and firepower, the Americans demonstrated that innovation could disrupt established assumptions, forcing adversaries to confront new operational realities. The captured Hellcat, examined in detail by German tankers, became a symbol of this shift, a small, lightly armored machine capable of altering battlefield expectations simply by moving faster than the enemy anticipated. Reinhardt's final report concluded with a sobering reflection. The M18 is not invincible. Its armor is insufficient against even modest enemy fire. Yet, through its speed, design, and tactical employment, it has exposed a vulnerability in our doctrine that we can neither ignore nor fully correct. It is a reminder that the nature of war evolves faster than the armor of men and machines. The legacy of this encounter reverberated beyond the Panzer Lehr grounds. German units in the field, though unable to replicate the Hellcat, adapted by incorporating greater reconnaissance, dispersal, and defensive awareness. Allied forces, meanwhile, continued to refine light, mobile armored vehicles, emphasizing hit-and-run tactics that leveraged speed over survivability. The psychological and operational lessons drawn from the Hellcat informed both sides' understanding of mechanized warfare in the final year of the conflict. In retrospect, the M18 Hellcat's encounter with Wehrmacht tankers offers a microcosm of World War II's broader truths. Ingenuity, mobility, and tactical flexibility could, in specific contexts, outweigh numerical superiority, raw firepower, or doctrinal rigidity. Captain Baker's philosophy engage, strike, and vanish proved sound not only in battlefield execution, but in reshaping perceptions of armored warfare itself. Even the most disciplined, battle-hardened German crews were forced to confront the unsettling reality that a small, seemingly vulnerable vehicle could redefine the rules of engagement, altering the war's tempo and the psychology of those who fought it. By the time Reinhardt returned to his command post, he carried more than just measurements and diagrams. He carried a lesson in humility, a recognition that even the most formidable forces could be challenged by innovation and audacity. In the quiet fields outside Bastogne, the M18 Hellcat had spoken. Speed, cunning, and adaptability were as lethal as armor and firepower, and the Wehrmacht would never look at mechanized warfare the same way again. The immediate aftermath of the captured M18 Hellcat examination lingered in Wehrmacht reports long after the brief encounter in northern France. German tank commanders, mechanics, and engineers pored over the vehicle's blueprints and captured notes, attempting to reconcile its remarkable performance with the rigid principles of armoured warfare that had dominated their doctrine since 1939. Reports filed to the higher command were meticulous, noting the vehicle's weight, engine output, and, most strikingly, its speed. 55 miles per hour on a road that would have bogged a panther or tiger in seconds, one German observer recorded, his words underscoring a mixture of awe and disbelief. This single fact, the speed, shattered decades of deeply ingrained tactical assumptions. The German armoured doctrine emphasized frontal engagement, concentrated firepower, and heavily armoured behemoths capable of shrugging off most enemy shells. The Hellcat, with its comparatively paper-thin armour, exposed the vulnerability in this philosophy. Mobility, not brute force, could redefine survivability on the modern battlefield. The Americans had effectively weaponized speed, turning a vehicle that was, on paper, fragile into a near-invincible predator in the hands of a trained crew. From a logistical perspective, the M18 also demonstrated the American approach to mechanized warfare: simplicity, reliability, and rapid production. While German engineers marveled at the Hellcat's radial engine and the continental transmission that allowed such high-speed maneuvers, their own super-heavy tanks, the Panthers, Tigers, and later the King Tigers suffered chronic mechanical failures. A Panther required constant maintenance in the field, and even minor terrain irregularities could immobilize it. The Hellcat's design, emphasizing standardization and ease of repair, highlighted a stark difference in industrial philosophy. American assembly lines had churned out these machines in numbers, and with a consistency that German planners could scarcely match under the duress of Allied bombing campaigns and dwindling resources. Psychologically, the captured M18 left an imprint on Wehrmacht leadership and frontline units alike. Veterans who had survived Kursk, Kharkov, and Normandy were suddenly confronted with a humbling truth. Technological superiority alone could no longer guarantee battlefield dominance. Instead, doctrine, crew training, and adaptability mattered at least as much as armor thickness or gun caliber. Memoirs written after the war often referenced this realization, describing how the speed and audacity of American armored tactics caused hesitation in units that had previously prided themselves on unwavering discipline. The Hellcat had not destroyed German forces by brute force, it had undermined their confidence, disrupted their planning, and forced a re-evaluation of the way they approached mechanized warfare. Historians today see this moment as a microcosm of a broader strategic truth. The M18 Hellcat's success, and the shock it produced among Wehrmacht officers, illustrates the growing importance of mobility, initiative, and decentralized decision-making in modern warfare. Its influence extended far beyond the fields of France in 1944. Post-war American and NATO armored doctrine, emphasizing speed, reconnaissance, and combined arms tactics, drew lessons directly from encounters like these. The experience informed not only vehicle design but also training, logistics, and command philosophy, underscoring the principle that a smaller, faster, and more agile force could neutralize or even outmatch a numerically or technically superior adversary. Even within Germany, the legacy of the captured Hellcat lingered. After the war, surviving officers reflected in memoirs and interviews on the limitations of their obsession with armor and firepower. The Hellcat, often described in these accounts as a ghost tank or phantom of the battlefield, served as a cautionary tale. Tactical rigidity, no matter how theoretically sound, could not withstand ingenuity, mobility, and the relentless pursuit of practical battlefield solutions. For the American crews, the legacy was both tangible and symbolic. The Hellcat embodied the philosophy that speed and initiative could compensate for other vulnerabilities. Veterans recalled the exhilaration of racing across open fields, striking from unexpected angles, and then disappearing before the enemy could react. The psychological effect on the crews themselves was profound. Confidence in their machine translated into decisive action under fire, reinforcing the principle that human skill, when paired with adaptable technology, could rewrite the rules of engagement. In the end, the captured M18 Hellcat stands as more than a historical curiosity. It is a testament to the evolving nature of warfare, the interplay between industrial capacity and battlefield tactics, and the human capacity to innovate under pressure. Its story reminds us that wars are not won by steel alone, but by the combination of intellect, audacity, and the courage to challenge conventional wisdom. The Germans may have been stunned by its speed, but history preserves the deeper lesson. Adaptability, more than brute force, often determines the outcome of conflict. Even today, military scholars cite the Hellcat's design and operational philosophy as a model for balancing speed, firepower, and survivability. Its legacy endures in the doctrines of reconnaissance units, light armored vehicles, and rapid response forces worldwide. The captured M18 did more than astonish Wehrmacht tankers in 1944. It quietly reshaped the way armies would think about armored warfare for generations. In the weeks following the examination of the captured M18 Hellcat, German command struggled to integrate the lesson it provided. Reports filtered slowly through the military bureaucracy, analyzed by engineers and tacticians who had spent years building doctrine around heavy armor and concentrated firepower. Yet, despite their respect for the Hellcat's speed and agility, the systemic constraints of the Wehrmacht industrial bottlenecks, material shortages, and rigid adherence to hierarchical planning meant that immediate adaptation was impossible. The Allies, by contrast, continued to field the M18 in growing numbers, refining tactics that emphasized its strengths and minimizing exposure to its thin armor. At the unit level, the psychological impact was unmistakable. Tank crews across northern France, both American and German, remembered the Hellcat not just as a machine, but as a symbol of unpredictability on the battlefield. For German panzer crews, the captured vehicle became a cautionary tale. The assumption that a lightly armored vehicle would be an easy target was no longer safe. Memoirs written after the war detail a mixture of admiration and disbelief, recounting the sudden disappearance of American tank destroyers during engagements and the unnerving speed with which they struck from unexpected angles. One German officer reflected, "We knew the Americans lacked the armor of our Panthers, yet their audacity and speed made them ghosts. It forced every commander to rethink what invincible truly meant." For the Americans, the Hellcat became a cornerstone of tactical identity. Its speed and firepower allowed small units to achieve outsized effects on the battlefield, contributing to a broader sense of agency and initiative. Crews trained rigorously to exploit terrain, execute flanking maneuvers, and coordinate precision strikes that capitalized on the tank destroyer's mobility. The vehicle was light, yes, and vulnerable in a direct firefight, but in the hands of disciplined, well-trained men, it became a lethal tool for psychological and material disruption. Letters and diaries from soldiers describe the exhilaration of executing rapid strikes, the satisfaction of seeing heavier German tanks disabled by carefully targeted fire, and the confidence instilled by knowing their machine could outmaneuver almost anything the enemy deployed. Strategically, the Hellcat's success reinforced the American approach to armored warfare. Unlike Germany, which invested heavily in fewer, highly complex machines, The United States prioritized reliability, speed of production, and operational flexibility. This industrial philosophy allowed Allied forces to absorb losses, rotate crews, and sustain momentum over long campaigns. The captured M18, and the astonishment it caused among German officers, became a concrete illustration of the advantages inherent in this approach. Smaller, faster, more numerous machines could achieve results disproportionate to their size when combined with skilled crews and agile tactics. The long-term legacy of the M18 Hellcat extends beyond the Second World War. Military historians cite its design as a template for future light and medium tank development, emphasizing speed, maneuverability, and tactical initiative over sheer armor thickness. The psychological dimension instilling fear and confusion in the enemy while maintaining confidence within one's own ranks became a lesson that informed armored doctrine worldwide. NATO forces, for instance, adapted Hellcat principles when designing reconnaissance and rapid response armored units during the Cold War, blending mobility with firepower to counter heavier, slower opponents. The story of the captured Hellcat also highlights a broader historical irony. A vehicle that seemed fragile, almost disposable in the eyes of the enemy, could wield outsized influence on both tactical engagements and strategic thinking. The Wehrmacht had invested heavily in the ideology of invincible armor, yet it was the lightweight, fast-moving American tank destroyer that forced them to confront the limits of their assumptions. In a sense, the Hellcat was a small machine with a large intellectual footprint, reshaping German perceptions and compelling Allied forces to continue exploiting innovation in unexpected ways. Even today, surviving examples of the M18 Hellcat are preserved in museums, silent witnesses to a vehicle that redefined the battlefield in subtle but decisive ways. Visitors and historians alike study the radial engine, the sloped armor, and the lightweight chassis, marveling at how a tank destroyer with a mere 1-inch thick hull and 55-mile-per-hour top speed could challenge the most formidable armored doctrines of its time. Its story serves as a testament to human ingenuity, tactical foresight, and the enduring impact of material culture on warfare. Ultimately, the captured M18 Hellcat is remembered not only for the shock it caused the German army, but also for the broader lessons it imparted. Speed and initiative could triumph over brute force. Well-trained, disciplined crews could extract extraordinary potential from seemingly modest equipment. And innovation, when paired with practicality and courage, could redefine the rules of combat. It was a small, fast, and seemingly fragile machine, yet it left a permanent mark on the conduct of war, the psychology of soldiers, and the evolution of armored warfare for generations to come. The captured Hellcat reminds us that in war, as in history, the unexpected often carries the greatest lessons. What the Germans saw as a novelty, a lightweight American tank destroyer, turned out to be a harbinger of change, revealing that battlefield supremacy was not merely a function of size or firepower, but of adaptability, ingenuity, and the courage to challenge conventional thinking. As the war in Europe progressed into late 1944 and 1945, the reputation of the M18 Hellcat only solidified. American units continued to employ it in fast-moving operations across France, the Ardennes, and into the Rhineland, exploiting its mobility to outmaneuver heavier German armor and create tactical confusion. After the Battle of the Bulge, post-action reports frequently cited Hellcat platoons executing daring flanking maneuvers, striking from unexpected directions, and disappearing into the terrain before German crews could respond. These accounts were corroborated by German intelligence assessments, which grudgingly admitted that the vehicle's speed and low profile had undermined carefully constructed defensive plans. The psychological dimension of the Hellcat's presence cannot be overstated. German tank crews, conditioned to respect mass and firepower, found themselves repeatedly outpaced by what they had been taught to consider inferior machines. Memoirs from the period reveal recurring phrases. They came from nowhere. We never saw them until it was too late, and too fast to kill. The irony was profound. A tank designed with only 1-inch armor, vulnerable to almost every set, a German gun, had become a symbol of American ingenuity and tactical audacity. The Wehrmacht's emphasis on armored supremacy, meticulously taught in schools from PZ, Schule in Munster to the elite Panzer divisions, was being challenged not by brute force but by design efficiency and crew skill. Meanwhile, the engineering lessons of the captured Hellcat rippled through German military analysis. Technical reports catalogued its Continental R-975 radial engine, its torsion bar suspension, and the lightweight but resilient chassis. Engineers marveled at how these features combined to allow high-speed maneuvers across varied terrain, from the muddy fields of northern France to the broken roads of Belgium. Unlike the heavy Tiger and Panther tanks, which required careful preparation and significant fuel, the Hellcat could cover miles quickly, respond dynamically to threats, and retreat before being engaged effectively. This revealed a crucial limitation in German armoured doctrine. Mass and armour, while imposing, often sacrificed the operational flexibility necessary to control fluid battlefields. For American commanders, the Hellcat's effectiveness validated a doctrine that prioritized combined arms, mobility, and decentralized decision-making. Crews were trained to exploit the tank's speed in small unit actions, using terrain to mask movement and coordinating through radios to concentrate firepower on critical targets. In practice, this often allowed a platoon of 6 to 12 M18s to punch far above its nominal strength, neutralizing German medium tanks and forcing armored formations into defensive postures. As one post-war American account observed, it was not merely a tank destroyer. It was a tactical equalizer, a way to impose our will on enemy formations without paying the price of massed armor. The legacy of the captured Hellcat extended beyond battlefield tactics. In the post-war years, military scholars frequently cited its design as evidence of the importance of innovation, rapid production, and adaptability. Lessons learned from the Hellcat influenced Cold War armored doctrine, particularly in NATO countries, where lighter, faster vehicles were incorporated for reconnaissance and rapid reaction roles. The vehicle's emphasis on speed and firepower over protection became a guiding principle for many subsequent designs, reflecting a shift in thinking that valued operational maneuverability and crew proficiency over sheer survivability. In German post-war assessments, the M18 Hellcat was consistently noted as an example of Allied ingenuity overcoming numerical and technological disadvantages. Analysts highlighted the contrast between the American philosophy of simple, reliable, and fast production with the German obsession with complex, heavily armored vehicles that were costly to build and maintain. The Hellcat exemplified how efficiency, tactical acumen, and speed could produce disproportionate effects, even against ostensibly superior equipment. One former Wehrmacht officer wrote in his memoirs, "We were trained to expect heavy tanks to dominate the battlefield. The Americans showed us that clever use of speed and surprise could render the mightiest armor vulnerable." Beyond technical and tactical lessons, the human element remained central. The soldiers who manned the Hellcats remembered the sense of empowerment the vehicle provided. Diaries and letters describe exhilaration and nervous anticipation, the precise timing of maneuvers, and the delicate balance of aggression and caution required to maximize the machine's potential. Crews often spoke of the bond formed between men and machine, the trust that the Hellcat would respond to their commands, and the fleeting moments of invincibility that speed could create, even in the face of overwhelming enemy firepower. The broader historical irony is perhaps the most enduring lesson. The Wehrmacht, confident in its superior armor and firepower, invested heavily in creating seemingly invulnerable tanks, while the Americans leveraged numbers, mobility, and ingenuity to achieve decisive results. The captured M18 Hellcat crystallized this contrast. A lightly armored vehicle, easy to dismiss on paper, had repeatedly confounded veteran German tankers and forced reconsideration of deeply ingrained assumptions about battlefield dominance. In essence, the Hellcat's legacy lies not only in its combat record, but also in its capacity to challenge conventional wisdom, proving that adaptability, innovation, and crew skill often outweigh sheer mechanical strength. The story of the captured M18 Hellcat, therefore, is more than a tale of a single machine. It is a reflection of the interplay between technology, human psychology, and military doctrine. It demonstrates that in war, the most effective weapons are not always the largest or most heavily armed, but those that enable rapid, intelligent action, and that amplify the skill and creativity of those who wield them. From the muddy fields of France to the careful analyses of post-war historians, the Hellcat endures as a symbol of tactical ingenuity, an enduring reminder that the unexpected often reshapes the course of conflict in ways that theory and doctrine alone cannot predict. By the spring of 1945, as Allied forces pressed deeper into Germany, the reputation of the M18 Hellcat had grown to almost legendary proportions among both American and German troops. Veterans who had encountered the tank destroyer in Normandy, the Ardennes, and the Rhineland recounted the same recurring theme. Speed and surprise could render the most formidable enemy forces ineffective. In contrast, German crews, trained to respect armour and firepower above all, were often left stunned, frustrated, and in disbelief at what they had faced. The captured Hellcat, examined and re-examined in German workshops, became a stark reminder of this evolving reality. The post-war analyses of German officers and engineers repeatedly emphasized the lesson learned from their encounter with the Hellcat. While the Wehrmacht had invested massive resources in the production of heavy tanks like the Tiger and Panther vehicles that weighed 60 to 70 tons, consumed enormous quantities of fuel, and required meticulous maintenance, the Americans had produced a light, agile, and easily manufactured vehicle that, in the hands of skilled crews, could achieve tactical outcomes far beyond its modest size. One former Panzer officer recalled, "We were taught that armour dominates the battlefield. The Americans showed us that speed and audacity could do the same, and often more." This juxtaposition revealed a deeper truth about the nature of industrial and doctrinal advantage. The United States, with its enormous industrial capacity, had not only produced vehicles in quantity, but had emphasized designs that maximized utility and operational flexibility. The M18 Hellcat, with its 1-inch armor and high-powered engine, embodied this philosophy. Its ability to rapidly engage and disengage, exploit terrain, and coordinate with infantry and artillery created tactical advantages that outweighed its vulnerabilities. The psychological impact of this approach extended beyond the battlefield, reshaping the expectations of German armoured commanders and forcing them to reconsider long-held beliefs about mechanized warfare. For American crews, the Hellcat was more than a machine. It was a tool that validated their training, honed their instincts, and amplified their decision-making. Letters and diaries describe the exhilaration of dancing with the enemy, the precise timing required to strike and retreat, and the intense trust between crew members and their vehicle. Each engagement, each narrowly avoided shell, reinforced the notion that skill and initiative could achieve what raw power alone could not. This human dimension confidence in one's comrades and one's tools was inseparable from the tactical success of the Hellcat. The legacy of the M18 Hellcat extended into the post-war era, influencing armoured doctrine worldwide. NATO forces in Europe, observing the lessons of 1944 and 1945, integrated lighter, faster vehicles into reconnaissance and rapid response units. The concept of using speed and mobility to offset heavier enemy armour became a central principle, echoing the experiences of Hellcat crews in France, Belgium, and Germany. In this sense, the Hellcat's influence transcended its own combat record, shaping military thought and procurement decisions for decades to come. Reflecting on the broader historical irony, one sees a consistent theme. A vehicle that could have been dismissed as lightly armoured and inconsequential repeatedly confounded the expectations of a highly trained and technologically sophisticated opponent. The German emphasis on brute force, meticulous planning, and heavy armour, though effective in many contexts, was not universally superior. The Hellcat demonstrated that innovation, adaptability, and operational speed could achieve results that traditional metrics of strength could not predict. In the end, the story of the captured M18 Hellcat serves as a powerful testament to the interplay of human ingenuity, material engineering, and tactical doctrine. It illustrates that in warfare, as in life, perceived limitations can become strengths when combined with creativity and skill. German tankers, once confident in the supremacy of their armour, were forced to confront the reality that smaller, faster, and more adaptable systems could dictate the tempo of battle and disrupt even the most formidable formations. As historians and veterans alike have noted, the Hellcat's true significance lies not solely in the tanks it destroyed, but in the lessons it imparted. That speed can triumph over mass, initiative over rigidity, and ingenuity over brute force. From the muddy fields of northern France to the reflective pages of post-war analysis, the M18 Hellcat remains a symbol of tactical brilliance, an enduring reminder that in the complex calculus of war, it is often the unexpected and underestimated that reshapes history. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.